My name is Monica Saavedra. I work as a staff research associate in an HIV research lab for UCLA's David Geffen School of Medicine, and I've been there for about 4 years now.
All right. And what do you do in that research lab?
Well, it's an HIV research lab, but we focus more on microbiome and also mom-baby transmission. So a lot of our studies in the past, and we work a lot with breast milk, because when the moms are nursing in like third world countries or countries that are not as developed and they're HIV positive, they're feeding their children. So they are at risk, the child is at risk of contracting HIV through them, through the mom. So we are looking into the components as of like what happens. How does it happen? It happens through breast milk transmission. Is it only breast milk transmission? Because there's so many factors when it comes to breastfeeding as to how babies can get infected through HIV. Some babies get infected early on. Some babies get infected later on. So we look into that, and also to see the benefits of breastfeeding, because breastfeeding is very important for babies, especially in underdeveloped countries. So to make sure that to stop breastfeeding because of the risk of HIV infection could also be very deadly to the babies, because they don't get all the nutrients and their microbiome, which is all the little bugs in your gut that help your body work. Well, we want to see that. We want to see what the baby gets from breastfeeding. So once the baby, receives all the milk from the mom, we take a look at the baby's gut. So we take stool samples from the baby, and we want to see what from the mom's breast milk makes its way into the gut and the microbiome of the baby. And there have been, my PI, which is my boss, has published papers on it as to the benefits of breastfeeding. That just because they're HIV infected mothers, they should not stop, especially in these underdeveloped countries, because it's very important to keep these babies well, that they actually get all the nutrients that they can get. There's no formula over there. It's not as easy as it is here in the States to be able to feed your baby if you can't breastfeed. So that is one component that we take a look at in our lab. We have several studies going on at all times. We take a look at, because it's an infectious diseases, we're part of infectious diseases department. We take a look at everything else too. So when Zika popped up, we took samples for Zika. Right now, because all research has stopped at UCLA, we switched over to the COVID-19, so SARS-CoV-2. So now what we're doing is we halted all of our research, and we're focusing more on testing health service workers and first responders, especially because health service workers and first responders are, treating these patients that are sick. It's good to know if they have it. And so, especially first responders, they go into your home. If something's going on, you don't know if you're infected, if the person's infected. 9 times out of 10, if it's like an elderly person that fell and they call the first responders to come in and help, or if they had a heart attack or something, they're susceptible to this virus, especially if they stay at home and they haven't been exposed to anything. We want to know if our first responders are positive. And you see it especially with firefighters. They all live together for huge amounts of time, so it's just going to spread. So we want to make sure that we can be testing these first responders and health service workers to make sure that they know if they need to self-quarantine. And also to keep them safe, because they take it home to their families, to their friends. So whatever they get from taking calls. So it's very important to track all of that and to see where everybody is, and for them to know their status if they need to self-quarantine. So right now our lab is focusing on doing that, doing testing. We do antibody testing. We're also doing the serology. So we want to know, we take blood samples, we take plasma, serum. We're also taking the nasal swabs, which is what we do for the testing, saliva and everything. Because right now this COVID-19 is so unknown. Nobody really has an idea of what's going on. It's very important to take as much as you can at this time, especially with everybody being infected, we can track people. So you can see like a health service worker, for example, that is healthy and doesn't have anything, doesn't have COVID-19, and they get it through their job or through going to the grocery store. We're taking follow-up samples every 2 weeks to test them. So we can actually see if they get infected, how it affects them, and then if they recover fine and don't have any symptoms, or if they do get symptoms, or if they have to get admitted, this is such a unique time to where you can really see the flow of infection and how different people react, because you do see that some healthy young people just don't even have any symptoms. Some healthy young people are on getting intubated, and or they live at home with their grandparents or their parents, and it's just that's how it spreads. So it's just very important to jump on everything right now, grab as much as we can. And that's the thing with research, is sometimes you don't really know what you're going to do with these samples until later on. So it's just important to grab everything at this moment. So we're doing that, as well as testing all these workers. We are taking extra samples to utilize them later on. Once we have more information and more papers out, more information out, we can utilize these samples and help other researchers, help other labs. Like, hey, you need these samples, we have them, or we need these samples, and sharing data. It's just really important to really understand what's happening right now. And the beauty with working in infectious diseases and in this kind of lab is that even though we're HIV research lab, we do so much more than just HIV, that you have the ability to kind of learn all these things. Like, I didn't know about coronaviruses. I didn't even know about HIV when I first started. So just being able to learn everything and be exposed to all of these different like diseases and viruses and everything, it's really cool and interesting. And also to be helpful at a time like this, to just test as many people as we can. It's very rewarding, and it feels like, we're doing something that can help at a time like this.
So the data that you're hoovering up for COVID-19 with the tests you're taking, I know there's a lot of talk of being asymptomatic. Basically, some of the stuff you're showing would actually be able to show people that are pre-symptomatic versus asymptomatic later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is something so unique, because the flu is seasonal and everything like that, but this one, because we don't know about the coronavirus, we don't have a lot of information about it. You can really see how it affects you. You'll be healthy, you didn't have anything last week, and then you get the virus this week, and we're going to catch it, and we're going to see what it does to you, how it affects you. And also the field people see these participants. So we also do questionnaires and stuff. So asking how you feel, what your symptoms are and stuff. We get a lot of information as to how different people react to this virus. Also the medical history and stuff. Some people are completely healthy and are getting intubated, and they never had any issues. And so that's just so mind-boggling to everyone as to why this is happening.
Who writes those questionnaires? Are they standard form?
We work with the Fielding School of Public Health. So they're epidemiologists. So they prepare all of the field, like all of the questionnaires, how they're going to see the participants, give them the kits and everything like that. And then we deal with the science part of it. So we work together with that School of Public Health, but they are the ones that put up the questionnaires and have everything ready, so that when they get our results back, they can put it together and work with it like that.
You referenced your PI earlier as your boss. What does PI stand for?
Principal investigator.
Okay.
So she is the one that runs the lab. She started the lab. We first were at Children's Hospital, and then we moved over to UCLA. So I've been with her for 5 years. So we've been together for a long time, and she is just like, her name is Dr. Grace Alderandi. She's a brilliant scientist and doctor. She has published many papers on mother-baby transmission, has done studies in Zambia, and in South Africa, with dealing with like making sure that babies, that you don't stop breastfeeding. Because it was first back a couple years ago, it was suggested that you would stop at 6 months, to stop breastfeeding so that the transmission rate would go lower. And her findings found that there's no benefit to doing that. It's more beneficial to expand it for a whole year, at least, to be breastfeeding your child, especially in places like that where, access to formula isn't as easy as it is here. And so she's done a lot of work, a lot of HIV work. She was, around during the HIV epidemic. And so she's seen a lot. And so she did compare and contrast what it is now and how it is now with coronavirus, that this is popping up, how HIV, when it first came out, it was so unknown and so scary. And, this is why we're taking extra precautions with this coronavirus, to stay at home and to wash your hands and constantly sanitize, because we don't know what's going to happen or how it affects your body later on in life. You see the chicken pox, you get the shingles later, right? And so with this, we're not really sure what will happen. So even though you got infected and you feel great and you're like, whatever, I got it, it wasn't a big deal, we don't really know the effects it will take as you get older or in a couple of years. So this is why research like this is very important, because we're all exposed to this, and we have to be aware of what the consequences are of this kind of virus.
So I know you're switching around to COVID to stay open essentially right now, but how often does the lab switch its objective? Is it project based? Is it just time based? And hey, I've done as much research as I want to on this topic. It's time to move to the next thing. How does that work?
It works. We constantly have different studies going on. We work with collaborators from other schools and also other scientists. How it works is the PIs and the higher scientists, and also we have, well, it's a couple things, I'm jumping around too much, but the PI and the other scientists will have collaborators, or they're writing grants. So they're writing grants so that we can get funding for these projects. So they're the ones that come up with these projects. And they say, hey, we have the sample set, or we're going to work with this collaborator. This is what we're going to be doing. And it's not all HIV. It could also be just different studies that they want, or different sample sets they want to take a look at. Microbiome, like I mentioned, is very important to all of us, because they're the little bugs in our gut that make sure that we're healthy. And in simple terms, it's it makes sure that we're healthy, make sure we're working well. And if you have your good bugs that are in your tummy that are making you, to make sure that you're healthy, we want to see how certain things affect you. So there was one study that we did where it was with the flu vaccine. We wanted to see how it affects your microbiome. There are just different studies, so many that they just collaborate with everybody. So what we do is we get all these samples shipped to us, or we start collecting samples, we start studies and start collecting samples, and we prep them for the next step, whichever that will be, just depending on what they want to do. But yeah, it's constantly changing. As soon as we finish a study, not even halfway through finishing a study, we're starting a grant for a next study or a next project. Especially with postdocs coming in, we have postdocs that come in, they have their own projects they need to do, they need to complete to finish or to move on. So it's whatever they're doing. And then also we take on fellows. So they're doctors that came in and they want to do their research projects. So we sit down with them, say, what is your project about? What do you want to do? And they tell me okay, this is what I want. And I just advise them okay, these are the samples you're going to need. This is how they're going to be treated. I need them here at these, times. And so that we can continue with their projects. But it's nonstop. There's never a dull moment with our research lab. It's constantly writing grants, constantly coming up with new projects.
Do you write any grants yourself, or do you exclusively have grant writers?
I do not. We have grant writers. It's usually my PI, more senior scientists. And then the postdocs and the fellows sometimes will help write grants. For us, we don't really have time to do much of that because we're constantly processing samples. My responsibilities are anything that walks through that door is my responsibility. So cataloging samples, we have about 20, we have 18 and we're going to order 2 more, minus 80 freezers. They're these huge freezers that are super cold. We store all our samples in, and I have to know every sample in that freezer for our studies. So we grab the samples, we store them away so that we have them, we know which one, where they are and how to pull them later for processing or extraction or whatever we're going to do to them. And also processing all the samples we take. Well, like for right now, for the study that we have with the COVID-19, it's constantly blood processing, receiving samples that are coming in through that door all day long, prepping them for whatever we're going to do with that project. So everybody has a role in the lab. So yeah, we have grant writers and everybody that's doing that on that side, or logistics, and then they have us in the lab actually working on samples, and also just general upkeep of the lab and everything nonstop.
So you're in an infectious disease area. I mean, is there any limit on what kind of samples you can receive? Is there some type of prep you have to do knowing that some type of sample is going to be coming in?
Yes, it depends on your level. So it's your safety level. So we are a BSL 2 plus because we work with HIV. The different levels, depending on what you're working on, none of the things that we're working on are airborne. So it's not as a strict lab, but if you like go to a BSL 3 level or 4, it's different. Like BSL 3, we're our collaborator, they're growing virus right now, coronavirus. So they're BSL 3. They can't take anything into that room. They can't even take anything that comes into that room stays, and nothing can come out except you. So you're gowned up and you're going. So for us, we have our lab coats, we have our goggles, we have our face shields, our masks, we double glove. And so we take BSL2 samples. So just, when the coronavirus samples come in, and we're doing different studies with that. So we have just the testing of the health service workers and responders, but we also are doing a convalescent study, which are people that have already recovered, and also people that are positive. So when those samples come in, we're supposed to treat everything as it's infectious, right? Because it's not just coronavirus; it could be anything. They could have HIV, they could have anything. So you treat everything with care. And these tubes are glass blood tubes, so they can break. So we take everything in. We have a protocol written up of how you're supposed to receive samples, where they're supposed to go, what temperature they're supposed to be at. You have to be very cautious of what you're doing and what you're holding. It's even as simple as we have pens designated for gloved hands and pens and computers that you need to touch without any gloves. And so everything in that lab is, separated. You can't be writing with the pen that you had in your hand when you had your glove on, take it to your desk, and then start writing with it again in a bare hand. It's just being very careful of what you're doing. But yeah, we have to be very careful with all our samples, and we only receive samples that are within our limitations of our lab. So anything super, I guess, like anything airborne, anything like that's higher level, we do not receive, which is just something that is known to other collaborators. They're not going to send us anything. We've never had rogue samples show up, so that's good. But you just have to be very careful when you're touching anything really in that lab.
So how does a lab like yours, where it's based out of a university, communicate or interact with somebody like the CDC in those labs? Is there any two-way flow for information between you guys for like CDC recommendations, or is it nobody pays any attention to information from the lab until research is published?
The CDC will not that they contact you directly, they send out like a general message that, because I know when all this first started, nobody was allowed to test. The CDC was only allowed to test in certain and also certain clinical labs. And then once things started blowing up, we were all able to test. And that happened through just a wide announcement from the CDC telling us, this is what you're going to do. These are the certain tests that we're going to allow you guys to do. These are the certain kits you have to buy and all that stuff. And then we take it and we go with it. And then any positives or anything we have to report to the hospital, which then reports to the CDC and everything. So But there's no like, I'm gonna call the CDC kind of thing. But they all contacted. Yeah.
Oh, well, so you're mostly on COVID now, as we know too, but what would your typical day look like for like the breastfeeding research?
So typical day for me, I start at 6 a.m. And I come in, I check my email, and then I look at what samples we're receiving for the day because of the different studies. We have maybe 4 or 5 going on at the same time. We are going to be receiving samples all day. So it's making sure that I know what's coming in, making sure that we're tracking everything because the minute you need to have like a chain of custody for all these samples, and know that the paperwork comes with these samples because if we just have a blood tube that shows up, we need, and it has a label, we don't know who it came from, we can't use it. We need to know everything. So it's making sure that I have my whole day planned out as to what's coming in, what do I need to work on. Processing samples takes a very long time. It could be like something as easy as just aliquoting out like a huge bottle of breast milk into smaller tubes. And it also can just be processing blood. We spin it down, separate, the different components of it, but it does take a long time depending on the protocol. So getting all that ready. Also, we have a research assistant, and sometimes before this whole thing happened, we do have students that come in and help. So it's also prepping them for the day, sending them emails and everything like that. Um, we also do ship out samples to our collaborators. So I have to check, do I need to prep these samples for shipment? Checking all of our freezers, making sure that nothing is getting too warm. Sometimes the freezers want to die on a Friday at 4 p.m. So it's things like that. But just prepping for your projects for the day, knowing what I'm going to be doing, what samples I'm going to be processing, and how long it's going to take. Because, I mean, Friday with this sample, with the blood that I was working on, I started at 6:30 and I walked out the door. I literally walked out of the processing room at around 2. So I didn't leave that room all day because it was just so much work to do. And even without this COVID-19 thing, that's how my day is usually. I mean, you're sitting there, you have your samples set, and you're gonna just be working on them. Also, lab meetings as to what the next project is that you have to juggle on top of the other things that you're doing. So it's a busy lab. I like it though. It makes the time go by, but it also is super interesting, especially when we start new projects, to know like what you're doing and why you're doing it. Not just working on this blood because they told you to, but to really know why you're doing it.
How long are the samples generally kept for? I mean, if you've got 4 or 5 projects going on at a time, how long do you have to keep that stuff?
It could be months. And also we take extra samples of things, so those will stay in the freezers. I mean, I've had samples that I collected 4 years ago and we're pulling them out now because they're relevant again to other projects that we're doing. So sometimes the samples will sit there for a week. If they're going to go to a collaborator, we'll send them to them, but they could sit there for years. We have samples from my PI's projects from 2009 sitting in our
Oh,
freezer.
wow.
So that's why it's so important. You would think to just keep track of freezers would be easy and making sure that they're working, but some freezers are 20 years old, 15 years old, and so they hold these really precious samples. So it's constantly making sure that we are temperature controlling everything. We don't want to lose these samples, especially, I mean, you never know. The thing with with research is that you hoard all these samples because 9 times out of 10, you're going to use them in a couple of years for other projects. Um, so it's like a little biorepository that you're keeping. I mean, that's another thing is, and we also do a biorepository for a study in the LA area for HIV infected people who are also drug users. And we do that because it's such a high risk community on being HIV infected, but also being a drug user is going to increase your chances of something happening, and so we have that biorepository of samples that ship in every week that we store, and that we have this like array of samples ready for researchers that want to use it for their projects, or we've used it for our projects too. So it's just um, it's things like that that kind of keep you busy all the time and constantly keeping samples, storing samples. I store samples every day. My fingers are constantly being burned because we're constantly touching these cold samples and storing them. So but yeah, they're going to stay there up from a week up to like years.
For these other projects and collaborators you're working with, are there other universities nearby? Is it mainly private labs? What do the collaborators usually look like?
We work primarily with universities. So we work with Duke, UCSF, I mean, really, John Hopkins University, because because the collaborators are scattered throughout all the universities. We work with them, so we're constantly shipping samples back and forth, or zooming and talking to each other back and forth on what we're going to be doing next in their projects. So it's everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. Not so much private labs. Private labs don't like to share anything, so we really don't deal with them. But it's mostly just universities. And it's not just that, also because my PI is involved with like it's called AIDS Clinical Trials Group. So they are clinical. So they do clinical trials with HIV, and so it's throughout the country. I mean, it's actually throughout the world. We've been working with people that are located in Peru, that are located in South Africa, a lot of collaborators in South Africa and stuff, because of this clinical trials group that she's in charge of. We also get samples from them, and we also help them with their projects. So it's really cool because you get to talk to so many different people. And I'm getting emails like at 2 a.m. from people that are in another country, and they're like, "Good morning, like let me tell you what I'm going to do today and what you need to send me or whatever." But it's from everywhere, everywhere.
That's pretty neat. Are they, when you're dealing with other universities, are they usually working on similar research? Like, is it overlapping at all? Is it just adjacent? Or is it, hey, I know you have these samples for this, I want to use them for a completely different thing?
All of it. It could be all of that. They've dealt with multiple studies going on like that, where they say, I know that you have these samples. I'm going to do this project. Can you share them? And we work together with this. Also, we're doing the same project, or we're working around the same line. So they want to collaborate or take samples that we have, or we're requesting them from them. So it's all of it. That's the
Oh,
beauty of
well,
research.
that's kind of fun. At where you're at now, do you have, I know you said that you have the lab meetings. Do you ever get to like throw your hat in the ring for something you think would be interesting to work on or something, like try and influence your PI?
I'm just a lily little staff research level 2. Uh, I mean, not so much as the years have gone by. And I mean, I got hired to pretty much just clean the freezers and sign packages and stuff. And now I've moved up, um, and it's getting there. Right now, what I'm pushing for is to be more involved in more complex processing and different projects, and I guess being challenging myself as to doing something more harder. Like, so I am throwing myself out there in the sense of like, I'll do this, or I'll help with this, or I want to learn how to do this different technique, or these different platforms or different assays. Um, is doing that. Usually, when people are designing studies, they in lab meetings with us, with everybody, they are telling us like, this is what our idea is, or this is what we're planning to do. They are the ones that have already set everything up, or they'll refer to people that have specialized in virology, or a molecular level, depending on what they want advice with. They'll refer to those scientists, and for me, they'll refer to me and say like, we want these samples, like how should they be collected, what tubes do we use, what do we do, how do we collect them. And also, I got my phlebotomy license this past year, so now they're using me more of like, can you draw blood for this, can you do this. So it's becoming more like I'm getting more involved in the actual study design. um, and I'm hoping to move into clinical, more of the clinical side, clinical trials, because I want to be there when we start the project, designing the project, getting ready for it, and understanding fully why we're doing it. That's always been my hang up with research, is that I constantly have to push to really get the explanations for why we're doing these things. Because I just want to know, like, I don't want to just sit there and work on it. I actually want to know the purpose behind all of it. And with clinical trials and stuff, to be able to design the projects would be my dream, because then I could really know what we're doing and why we're doing it, and knowing that these samples, there's a purpose. There's a purpose, obviously, for all of it, but knowing the purpose for it. Um, and I do like I'm very like particular in how we do things. So the clinical trials is so strict, clinical side. You paperwork and you're tracking everything. I love that because I hate losing everything or losing things. And research is like, people come in and they're just, you know, flowing around and doing whatever they want to do, throwing things in everywhere. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I like structure and
You get to
the
bring
clinical
order to
side.
the chaos.
Yeah, it's fun doing that, except when, the chaos doesn't want to stop. So
Well, I guess it's a good time to get into your education. What did you train for, or what did you study in college? I'm assuming you went to college for this.
yes, I went to Cal State LA. I got my bachelor's degree in biology. I actually started at Mount Sac, and I went in for business, and then I switched it because I started watching CSI a lot, and I got really into forensics. And so I learned that you have to be a biology major to do that. So I went into bio, did that. Um, and during my biology, when I was getting my undergrad, and I always tell this to a bunch of, like, not just scientists, but anybody with, that wants to, when they're in college, is I applied for like summer internships for different labs, and you needed letters of recommendation. So I went to my professor and I asked for a letter of recommendation. And because they realized that I had an interest in it, because a lot of kids in college, especially in bio, you're like so tunnel visioned, or they want to be doctors, so they're tunnel visioned in that they're not really paying attention to research or anything. So um, they referred me to a job at Children's Hospital, and that's how I got my job there, and that's how I am now. And I would never have gotten here had I not, spent time with my professors asking for advice and what we should be doing, and what internships should I be taking. So always talk to your professors, always go to office hours, because they're the ones that are going to help you. And if you are driven and they see that you're interested, they will help you getting into a job or referring to you to wherever you want to go. So I got sidetracked there, but yes, I got my bachelor's degree in bio, and then while I was getting it, I got hired at Children's Hospital, and with my PI, and I finished my degree working in that lab. So it was, I am very grateful for that, and very fortunate that happened. And there's so many things with bio that you could do, but the fact that it's such a broad major, you can get lost, and um, you might not know what you want to do, which was, for me, I wanted to do forensics, and then I got into this research lab, and then I kind of forgot about that, and I got into this, and I realized that this is so much cooler for me. It was a better fit for me. But I think it's super important to just be interested and talk to your professors, especially because they're the ones that know the field. They know what's going on and the jobs to go to.
When you started with business, was that had genuine interest in business, or you just thought it was reputable?
I thought it was reputable. I was like, you know what, business would be good, right? Sometimes I'm like, man, I should have gone with that, but no, it was just something that kind of popped in my head. I was senior year of high school, and I was getting nervous as to what I was going to do, and so I just went into Mount Sac and started business, and then I started watching a lot of CSI, and then I got really into science.
How long were you already into school before you
I
getting into the
was
sciences?
I was already 3 years into Mount Sac. I had finished all my, all your prereqs, everything you need to do. And then I started going into the business classes. And then I switched. kind of random. All of a sudden overnight, like I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to do science. So started all over with the science entry level classes. So it took me some time, and um, it was very hard. I take a long time to really understand things. I get very sidetracked easily, especially if it's something I'm not interested in and it's kind of boring. I can read the same thing over and over and it won't click. So it was very difficult um, to get a bachelor's degree in bio. Even like the basic bio classes, I struggled. I failed classes. I had to retake my math classes. Um, you know, bio, there's a lot of smart kids in that field. So I just tried to not get discouraged. And it's challenging, but it is rewarding. And the fact that I graduated and I was able to do this, what I'm doing now, it really showed me like there's things I always did well in my labs, but I always struggled in lecture. And I'm just better with my hands and actually working and being, that's why it's so important for me to understand what I'm doing instead of just being told what I'm doing, what to do. Um, but it's really important to just, if this is something that you want and you want to do, just stick through it and to ask for help, make friends with your classmates. People have books on PDF that you don't have to buy. They have study guides, things like that. That way it'll help you. And I was really fortunate because Cal State LA has a program for minorities in STEM where we got, if you attend these meetings and you keep your GPA up, they provided like priority registration, free book rentals, things like that. That really helped me a lot. I don't think I would have been able to finish. And also my friends, my friends in college, we are still friends now, and they helped me. They studied, these are smart kids. So they guided me through this scary time of college. And I got through it. And it was really rewarding to know that people that didn't think I was going to make it or didn't think I was cut out for it or wasn't smart enough, they are not in the place that I am. I made it and I was able to do it. And it's, you have your book smarts, which is very important, but it's also your drive. If you're driven to do it, you will do it and you'll get there. You'll find a way. I always found a way around getting around all these obstacles to get to where I needed to be. And bio, I think, is the epitome of that. Unless you're taking chemistry or something, that's like too crazy. But for me, this was it was really challenging, but very rewarding. And I'm happy that I stuck to it and didn't, quit.
I had a very similar experience. I was actually in college already, probably 2 years in, and I switched majors too. So I'm curious to see what your feelings on it were, but did it just click for you? Like, this is what I needed to do, or was it scary and you wrestled with it for a little bit? Like you thought about doing it first before actually pulling the trigger?
Yes, I did. I thought about it. And I was like, I'm already in. What are my parents going to think? They're going to be mad at me because all these classes that I've taken, and they're going to think that I'm just like messing around and not really getting my work done. But I had to do it. It was something that was like, I need to do this. I can't, I'm at a time right now. It's like that scary time in your life where you're like, what you decide to do is going to affect you later, And so I said I had to do it. I had to. I'm like, the sciences were scary and I had no experience with bio at all, but I just jumped on it and I was like, worst case scenario is that I hate the first class and I'm already halfway through the other one. I'll just go back. But
How old were you at that time?
I was 20, I was 20 years old. Yeah, yeah, 20, I was almost 21. So yeah, I look back and I'm like, oh man, okay, good for you. Like, I'm glad that you did that because man, maybe you weren't as slow as I thought. You were a
How
good
long
20-year-old.
how long did you wrestle with it for?
It was like a month and a half. I think I really thought about it during the summer break
Mm.
because, you have to start enrolling. I took summer classes all the time, and my biggest hangup was math. Math is so hard for me. And I was like, you have to take math, like all these math classes, but I did it. I mean, I was like, either you do it now or you're never going to do it. So
When what was the turning point for you? Was it just one night you decided, okay, it's time?
And it was actually watching my show, my CSI show, and being like, this is so cool. Like, I want to know about it. And I don't want to just be one of those people that knows about it because I watched the show. Like, I actually want to do it. And so I was like, I need to do it. This is what I want to do.
When you were a kid, were you interested in the sciences at all, or did it just come all about when you were watching the show?
Um, I remember like in high school and stuff, liking chemistry and liking bio and being very much like I had my beliefs in bio, right? And learning about like how it happened, the Big Bang, evolution, everything always interested me. And in high school, I was like into evolutionary biology, but I couldn't really figure out how that would make me a living unless you're like teaching or different. There are different researches like research for evolutionary biology, but it just never clicked to me like this is something that's going to be able to support me in the sense that like I'm really going to do this for the rest of my life. But I really was interested in it. But then I kind of forgot about that during college because I was like, okay, well, I need to go into business. And so it came back when I switched, and it did remind me, like, hey, you did like that at one time. It's probably going to work out.
Yeah, when you were younger, did you have a job in mind that you thought, like, oh, I'm going to grow up to be an astronaut or something crazy like that? Or was it just
Oh
all
my
kind of
God.
as you got older, this is what it was going to be?
I always wanted to be a doctor, but I wanted to be a doctor because I was like, oh, they make money and they look really cool and you'll be doctor, whatever. And then I realized that like, no, it's probably not gonna work. Um, no, yeah, that's what I always like was thinking about. So I guess it was always kind of in the health sciences field, always kind of in the back of my mind, but I always found it very unattainable. I never even thought even when I was doing the bio, my undergrad, I always thought I was gonna fail out of it, that it was gonna have to go back to another major. I guess I just never really took it seriously until I finished, and then I finished, and I was like, oh wow, like I made it.
So you get your degree by talking to your professors and being willing to volunteer, you end up at the job at the Children's Hospital.
Hmm.
I imagine you got on the job training there to a certain extent because you said there were certain things that you learned that you had no idea about with like HIV
Hmm.
and things like that. What else have you learned about that you didn't know about from school? What kind of on the job training have you gotten?
Well, yeah, the a lot, but because in school they make you like in your labs they make you have a lab notebook, prep for your projects. Now I understand why they do that because it is very similar to your work. You have to keep your lab notebook and everything like that. But um, what work trained me honestly is your hands, how you handle your samples, how to properly pipette, how to properly, just it's so weird to say that, but it is. It's all how you work with your hands. Um, a lot of samples are very sensitive. Assays are very sensitive. A lot of these methods that you use for different projects, you have to be very careful on how you handle things. And instead of just grabbing whatever, like in college, you would grab whatever and you would just kind of go for it. It's very different when you're working because you could really mess up your whole project by spilling something or forgetting to add something. Also, just being very aware of what you're doing, checking off your protocol and everything. That I learned that on the job was being very aware of what you're doing and to not just take it too easily or like take it too lightly, because it's hours of work that could be messed up by not doing your final spin or not freezing it properly. I mean, I had that experience where it took me 3 hours to do something to freeze these cells finally. I put them in this little cooler and I forgot to put them in the freezer. I walked away
Mm.
because I got sidetracked. So it's like things like that, constantly like being aware, like, oh, what did I forget? Did I forget something? Um, that taught me that. And also how to talk to people. Science People in science are weird, and they're very particular depending on who you're talking to. So learning to talk to people and to properly like I guess read people, I learned that in work. there's so many people, different people that work there, different ages, from different countries, different like cultures, and so it's a unique place to work because you're dealing with all of these different people, and different people have different personalities, and you're sharing a space with them. So they're like your roommates. So learning how to communicate well with others, I learned that there too. But yeah, it's been a great experience so far. I've loved it.
You said that you now got your phlebotomy license. Can you talk a little
Hmm.
bit more about what phlebotomy actually is?
Yeah. um it's when, well, you're drawing blood, so when you go to the doctor and you have to get your test, right, the phlebotomist wraps that little tourniquet around your arm and does that. And I always thought it was pretty scary. I did it because my goal eventually is to move into the clinical side, and I was hoping that maybe if I can't to work my way up, if I can just draw blood for clinical trials and then work my way up from there. So, and also for our studies, we draw blood, and so it's only the doctors that are around sometimes. So now I'm available to do it. But it's actually a lot of fun. I really like it. And if you're good at it, nobody feels the like when you actually do it, like when you actually put the needle in. If you do it pretty fast, no one notices, and then you end up being a favorite. So I really did experience that. I was very happy that I caught it really quickly, and um, I'm actually really good at it. I'm really happy about that, and it's a lot of fun, and it's useful to labs, so that's cool too. And my coworkers, they say you could draw me, and so I'll do that. But it's a good little side hustle too if you need to do something on the side, or if that's what you want to do. Phlebotomy is a really good job too. Working in the hospitals, that's where we did our training, because I did through UCLA's program, and we get put into, so crazy. They put you've your first day of class, they're like, okay, you guys are gonna start working, practicing on each other next week, and I'm like, what? And we practice on each other, and it was really scary because nobody knows what they're doing. And then, like 2 weeks later, they just throw you into these, like, in the hospitals, and you have to draw from patients.
Wow.
And I'm like, whoa, like that is crazy, but there's no way. That's how you learn. So that was a lot of fun.
I think I'm familiar with that time frame because around that time when we were hanging out, you were just staring at everybody's arms. Like, that's a good vein. I could get that.
Yeah, I know you have really good veins. So that's, I know boys tend to have like really nice veins. I'm like, oh, okay, that was really nice. It's weird. You end up being a little creepy.
So let's say you get into the clinical side. Is there some type of research or something that you're really curious about or really excited about trying to work on or be a part of?
For right now, um, obviously I'm my bias towards like HIV, right? Because that's all I've been doing. It would be really nice to, because we've done infectious diseases for so long and it's such a cool area, but I would love to learn something else. Even like ophthalmology, I know that they have clinical trials. Um, just maybe some drug clinical trials to learn how the drug affects you, different things like that. I find that really interesting. Um, but right now, my goal is to just get into a clinical lab. We are working actually part, like it's weird, half the lab that I'm in now is clinical, and they are going to try to make the whole thing clinical. It's a really difficult thing to achieve. It's a lot of paperwork, a lot of tracking. You have to be like on top of everything. So we're working on getting that done. So if that happens, if and when that happens, I mean, I could use that experience too and stay and maybe try to get in, since we're technically a clinical lab, to get my experience working in a clinical lab for when I apply for another job. Maybe getting it would be a higher chance of getting hired, because research is so loose and free. You have a lot of freedom, where clinical is so like particular in how you do things and what you're going to be able to do. And so it's a little hard to make that change. A lot of clinical labs don't really want research people because they think that we're just kind of loosey goosey and doing whatever we want to
Hmm.
do. So I'm hoping that this change in our lab will help me. But as of right now, I'm just more focused on any kind of clinical lab. But research in general, like what I like is that clinical trials is like research. I mean, it's like a translational clinical lab. So what you're doing in your research is going to affect these clinical trials, and I like that because it's a little bit of a marriage between both of them. Um, that would be my dream if I could do something like that. But if I have to pick, I would love to move into the clinical side.
What's next based off of it? So working in this lab, you think it led to you getting your phlebotomy license. Is there going to be more schooling or more licensing you think you'll probably end up getting?
I'm debating on, so I would love to be a clinical lab scientist. So you have more responsibility with these projects. What we do in our lab, because we don't have such high throughput, we do a lot of everything by hand. And in clinical labs or in your hospital, when you go get your blood tested and you go take it to the clinical lab there, they have these huge machines that can do 200, 300, 500 samples at a time.
Oh,
So
wow.
these clinical lab scientists are in charge of managing and working all those machinery because they're very particular and you need a higher license for that. So that would be I'm really considering and looking into it. It's very challenging to get in. I think in California, there's about 3 schools that I've looked into that do it, and they take between 10 to 20 students every year. So it's very competitive. And so my drawback is that I graduated, but my GPA isn't as competitive as the other people that are applying. So right now with this whole COVID crisis, they're realizing that we have a shortage of CLS. So they are opening up, not saying so much to be easier to get in, but they are opening up the admission. So you have a better chance of getting in. So I'm focusing on deciding if I want to do that. I do also need to work, so it would have to be like an online thing or figuring out how I'm going to do that. Right now, that's what I'm dealing with, is trying to decide what my next step is, if I'm going to do that or if I'm going to put all my, like, everything into really trying to get into like a clinical lab or throwing myself into work, so that we could really build up my experience in clinical work.
Do you see yourself ever trying to teach or anything like that?
I really did want to actually, in the beginning, but you actually need a master's. So that would be another thing, is maybe going back for my master's. It's just so scary because college was so hard to go back again. Um, is this a lot? But I did really, Mount SAC did so much for me. I know a lot of like as yourself and everybody that I know, everybody went straight into a 4 year. And for me, Mount SAC was the best thing that could have happened to me. And I would love to give back to that school, and I would love to teach there, um, or any kind of community college, because at that time is like a great time to help these students and guide them as to where they're going to go next. My friends' kids are graduating high school, and I want to help them as much as I can, guiding them, because I remember being lost. So it would be very cool if I could teach. That would be dependent on if I want to go back for my master's. But I've thought about it, and um, I do like teaching. I mean, I teach our students, our like student workers and our lab assistants. I help them, and it would be fun.
Well, it seems like it would be a natural progression in the sense that you've gone from a student yourself in multiple scenarios, working through these things, getting help from professors, getting placed, to work at like learning stuff on the job, and now basically working with students again, the ones that come through your lab. So it makes a lot of sense. With that said, you mentioned some of the things that you like your lab notebook, right?
Hmm.
You see now why they try to teach you something in school. Is there something or a list of things that maybe you learned on the job that you're like you wish you knew in school, or maybe
Oh
wish I
yeah,
wish you knew how it was applied, things like that?
yes. I mean, yeah, because when before lab would start, we'd all be sitting in the hallway, like scribbling down our protocol for the day. And you were supposed to do that before so that you would really know what you're doing when you get to lab. So it's like, wow, like, why didn't I know that? And so now when I'm doing projects at work, and I'm spending days prepping for this especially something I don't know how to do, is like really writing everything down and highlighting and stuff. So I wish I would have really taken that seriously because it was a huge kind of like, oh, notebook. I treated it like I did in college when I got to work. And then I realized, oh no, this is like super important. Like you really need to know what you're doing and you really need to read. Um, so something like that was huge. And also, I guess like it's so weird, properly cleaning your glassware. Things are left behind that really can contaminate. Like the about 40% of my job in lab, and you'll hear it from other people, is cleaning, constantly bleaching, constantly wiping everything down. Because if you have contamination in something, it's just going to ruin everything that you're doing, and it's really hard to get rid of it. So that was another thing that I wish I would have like really focused on, because now it's like second nature. You're constantly cleaning. In the beginning, though, it's always a learning curve, especially coming from not really knowing. You think that you know things when you graduate college, especially like I've spent 4 years studying this, but you really don't. When I went into lab, I was like, oh, I think I knew one thing when I went in, and everything else I was taught on the job, which I'm really grateful for the staff and my boss taking a chance on me. It was I'm really lucky that they did that. And I really hope that PIs and other labs do take chances on these kids that don't have much experience. They always say, well, do you have research experience? Like if you're in college and stuff. But some of these kids, I've hired some of our work study students that had no idea what they were doing. They ended up working very well because they're so trainable and they're just eager to learn, that they're willing to just sit there and listen to you and listen to whatever you have to say about how to do things, versus kids that think that they know how to do everything and they just don't really want to listen to you, and then they end up messing up their project. And then it's I mean, you still have a chance of fixing it and helping them and saying like, this is why we do things. But sometimes kids that are just willing to learn and have a drive are your best bet.
Well, and I guess that was really my next question was, who's would you say this field is for? Is it only people with the drive? Is it any interest in the science, if it's general, or is it very specific interest?
It's actually general. It's very open. Like I said, for just because we're an HIV lab doesn't mean we're only doing HIV. We're part of infectious diseases, so it's all infectious diseases that we work on. It depends on what your interests are, but honestly, I would say that if you are curious about the sciences, you'll take your class, take a bio class, to see what you feel about it, and how you feel about like learning about these different things, um, and then try to get into any research lab. It's really hard if you're too picky. It's hard to get in, but I would say just get into a research lab. Ask that you can volunteer in college, especially. If you can volunteer in a lab, I'll clean, or I'll feed your mice, or whatever, and work your way up and show that you're interested. Because even though you're working in a lab that deals with something very particular, very specific, it's not so, it's a science, but it's also what it teaches you on how to work in a lab. A lot of labs function fairly similarly, like in the sense of how you accept samples, how you clean, how you work with other lab mates, and how things are done in a lab. You will take that with you wherever you go. And so, just because you're not interested in that research at that moment, really take that time to learn as much as you can, and then take it with you. A lot of jobs, a lot of labs have a lot of turnover because you're working with postdocs or candidates for their PhD, and once they finish their projects, they move on. And there's very rare scientists that stay like a long time. So it's a good spot if you want to kind of flow around and see what you like, and then you can stick to one thing that you really like. That's like a nice thing about research, is that it's not just one thing.
Very cool. Well, you've worked with people that obviously have been around, know a lot of things. Is there any wisdom they've imparted onto you that you'd like to share?
um, well, yeah, I have a lot of my boss and a lot of the senior scientists are brilliant people. And I guess the biggest thing they've they've taught me is to push and like persevere, like to work your hardest at something and like to not quit. Um, a lot, I mean, a lot of things with our COVID study. I mean, we had a lot of pushback as to opening up, and my boss didn't quit. She was like willing to do it outside of our lab and have us like figure it out somehow. And we'll all just, she's like, it'll work. We have to just try. And she's taught me that throughout the years that I've been working for her, is that just don't quit, like keep going. And it's the same thing with your projects. You have your projects that fail, something that might not work. If you just keep going, sit down, reassess, sleep on it, and then come back, and just try again. It's so funny that like that's kind of always been the theme of my life has been like just don't quit. And it's very fitting that I've worked for a boss that has kind of instilled that in me as well. um, with research and science, it's like you have a lot of things against you, a lot of failures, a lot of failed projects, a lot of things that don't want to work. But if you stopped at that point, you would have no progress, especially in the sciences. We're trying to find cures or trying to help people, and if it's too challenging and you don't want to keep going, there's never going to be any change or any improvement. And so, that is one thing. This job isn't for someone that is, if you don't get it the first time and you just don't want to move on and you want to quit, because I know I get that too. This is for someone who's willing to push through it. You don't quit. You can't with this field.
What do your hobbies look like? Downtime when you're trying to push through and try and not quit. I'd imagine that places a lot of stress, so you got to have some way to de-stress.
It's a lot of stress. I mean, honestly, it's been hard right now because we can't go out. We can't see our friends on the weekends. I'm very happy and very lucky that I have a job right now. But with that being said, all the stresses coming home and not being able to go anywhere is really it's hard. Um, I started playing video games. I have a Switch, so I started playing Animal Crossing.
Are you playing with
Also,
Jake or no?
no, I need to start connecting to other people. But that, and like we got a new TV, so it's been really nice. Sadly, I'm hoping that we can all get together again. With everything, I really miss. I'm really social, so it's really hard when you can't be social.
Hmm.
So, that my big thing is just hanging out with friends. I'm never really home, so right now that I am home, because we're forced to, it's rough. But my biggest thing is like hanging out with you guys, with friends, and just enjoying each other's company. That's really what my big de-stressor is.
Not
Just
talking about
enjoying.
work.
Not about work. Right now, I can't really not talk about work because whenever I see people, it's like, "Oh, so how's work? And what are you guys doing?"
Yeah, what's going on with COVID? What's the latest news?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we've been going just about an hour now. Do you have
Oh wow.
anything else you'd like to add or anything like that?
Um, check. I guess because all these kids is just graduated high school and stuff. Really look into what classes you need to take and be on top of it. Enroll soon so that you don't get left out. Classes fill up quickly, but ask for help with what classes you should take, and don't waste your time on classes you don't need. I think that's super important. And a lot of kids just want to take classes because their friends are taking classes, but I think those days are over when you go into college and you're paying for your own classes. Um, just really take a look at and map out what you need to take so that you utilize your time properly, so that you actually have more time to enjoy with your friends or doing whatever you want to do. I think that's super important. I tell my friends' kids that all the time.
I think that's really valuable advice, especially now with you don't know what education is going to look like anymore, how much is going to be distance learning versus in class. If you have limited in time class, make the best of it and make it for something you need.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
Well, I
Yeah.
really appreciate the time. I know it was a minute there to get started, but
Sorry about that.
no, it's all good. Well, I'd like to see when how things end up progressing for you when you end up in clinical. I'm going to have to see the difference and how that changes for you. So hopefully you'll be willing
Oh,
to talk about it again.
oh yeah. Hopefully it happens.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Enjoy your Sunday.
Thank you, you too.
All
Bye.
right. I'll see you soon.